Welcome to Bring a Hacker to Work Day. We're so excited to have you here as part of a day dedicated to learning, sharing, and amplifying the voices that shape the future of cybersecurity. This program is all about exposure and empowerment, creating opportunities to hear directly from industry experts about the threats, challenges, and innovations driving security today. Together, we're building stronger pipelines for all those who are trying to enter into tech while opening doors into the fascinating world of ethical hacking, security research, and threat modeling. Today's session takes us beyond Earth's surface and into orbit. We'll be hearing about space cybersecurity and threat modeling, a critical and emerging field where satellites, ground systems, and communications all face unique risks. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today Robert Hurlbut, a fantastic gentleman that I had the opportunity to meet at Blue Team Con, threat modeling educator, and author of the recent piece, Space Cybersecurity and Threat Modeling. Robert brings years of experience in guiding organizations through secure design and risk analysis. And today, he'll share his insights on how the security community can approach protecting our space systems against evolving cyber threats. Please join me in welcoming Robert.
I love that. Thank you very much. That's
You're
fantastic.
welcome.
That's hard to. The music is great, and to continue on, I would love to hear some more music. But no, let's dive in. Let me share my screen.
Make sure that you got that. Should be able to do it now.
Oh, okay. Yep, there it is. All right, and there we go. Hopefully, everybody can see that. So yes, so that's what we're doing today. We're talking about space cybersecurity and threat modeling, and in particular. This is based on a blog post that I put together last month. We have, with my company Toreon, we have what's called a threat modeler or threat modeling insider newsletter that comes out every month, and this was a part of that. And so this is also on the site. I'll show you the link for that if you're interested in going out and checking it out. But this is related to some of my own experiences and some of my own work, really combining a couple of great interests that I have over the last several years. And that's kind of dives into or jumps into, who am I? Robert Hurlbut, I'm many years software developer, architect, focused on application security as well as threat modeling. One of the things I do day to day is help a lot of teams think about threat models. I do a lot of training. I do a lot of training and working with clients to help put together threat models. But the other thing that I also do is I am working on a PhD. And so happens that right now I am working on a PhD in space cybersecurity at Capital Technology University. That's based in Maryland. I'm based on the East Coast in Connecticut. And this is something that was interesting to me when I was looking at considering diving into furthering my career in cybersecurity. I did receive a master in cybersecurity degree in 2020. Way back when I started out in mathematics and physics and always interested in technology, and then jumped into computers, but always interested in space from very, very young age. And I think many of us probably at some point in time we thought about what do you want to be when you grow up? And mine was also an astronaut. Many people thought about that, or working in space in some way. And I always had some interest in how could I get involved? How can I do something there? Fast forward a number of years, 3 years ago, actually, no, 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, I spoke to a colleague of mine who was interested in getting a PhD at this university in particular. And I said, well, I'm curious about that too. I'm thinking about, what's next for me in cybersecurity. And I looked at their offerings and noticed that they had this program in space cybersecurity. And I thought, wow, what a great way to combine a lot of the interests I've had over many years of uh, computers and cybersecurity and space. How do you combine all those things? And so that's how I got into this and started that journey of learning and looking to in the future, hopefully at this time next year, I'll have my doctorate and all kinds of interesting possibilities. And we'll talk at the end a little bit about some of the possibilities that are out there. There are lots of numerous opportunities, really. It is an area that needs attention, space cybersecurity, and folks who have expertise in that, or just curiosity in it, that can contribute. Again, as I mentioned, this presentation is based on the blog post that I wrote. You can take a look at it. It's on our website, Toreon, and Space Cybersecurity and Threat Modeling. So let's first of all talk about outer space, the essentially a growing infrastructure. So space systems, including the rockets and the satellites and the probes and crewed vessels like space shuttles way back when and other uh, vessels that are out there, space station and so on, have been in use for nearly 70 years. Now, way back when, a lot of the satellites, the first satellite around 1957 that was put into space, Sputnik, was a very, very simple satellite that just simply sent a signal back ever so often as a ping to say it's there, it's running, we know it's there, we can hear it, and so on. But that's really what started all of this in terms of satellites and being able to uh, have a presence in space. And of course, then we went beyond that, ultimately landing on the moon and many other space missions over the years. And so with that in mind, space provides opportunities for expanding networking, communications, surveillance, understanding for all of these governments, academics, as well as private organizations. And in fact, more and more these days, there are a lot of corporations, private companies that are getting involved in space, whether it be the space economy itself, involved in networking, communications, many, many different ways that lots of private organizations are getting involved, which also opens up opportunities for employment as well. So it's not just government or academic that are focused on space and the opportunities. But one thing that's really interesting so far is that we already know or have realized that space is becoming a critical infrastructure. We rely on it for nearly everything that we do. GPS navigation, satellite communications, weather monitoring, national defense systems. In fact, if you think about it, a lot of the systems that we depend on, if GPS went down or was inaccurate in some way, that would impact airplanes and, of course, our cars as we're traveling with trying to get around, boats and so forth, ships, lots of things that are using GPS that we absolutely depend on, and many other things to do the work that we're doing. And so, like systems on Earth, space environment systems are subject to cybersecurity attacks, which makes threat modeling critically needed. And we'll talk about what is threat modeling here in a moment. But one thing I want to mention is that in terms of uh, critical infrastructure, there are a lot of other things that we already depend on. We've talked about as well, or much in the news. But space being seen that way, and especially in relation to cybersecurity, is still relatively new. And with that in mind, there's not enough attention. There's some, since maybe the last 10 years, we've been talking about it, but there still needs to be more. And that's why, again, it's a really critical area to cover. Now, what is threat modeling? Maybe it's the first time you're hearing about this. Threat modeling essentially is analyzing representations of a system to identify and manage concerns about security and privacy characteristics. And so the idea that representations, it could be a system that we have diagrammed, or it could be a description of that system. Threat modeling is not a scanning tool. It doesn't scan systems. It doesn't look for vulnerabilities per se. It's more of a thinking tool, trying to understand what is it that we're trying to protect here? What is it that we're trying to understand better so that we can focus on those security and privacy concerns so that we can build a more secure system. Sometimes it's also known as architectural risk analysis. And usually threat models contain, again, those representations, maybe a diagram or description, any identified potential threats, any mitigations or countermeasures that we need to put in place to deal with those threats, and then also associated risks. And those threat models can really help developers, architects, stakeholders to proactively make decisions and build more secure systems. Think of a threat model in the sense that if you're building a house, how do you build it? Do you just normally put the thing together and hope it works? No, you put together a blueprint first. You want to understand how things work and where things are and so on. And so with that in mind, what a threat model can help you with is to be that blueprint, to proactively think ahead of what could go wrong, what could happen, and how do we deal with potential security issues that might arise. A good question is threat modeling similar to scenario events? Absolutely. Thinking of various scenarios, thinking through them, and what could happen, what could we do about those, and how do we resolve those? And that in turn can then inform how do we build out a system, or how do we put certain things in place. And so a threat model, a good threat model, can be really beneficial that way. Now, going back to the space topic, we're looking at a unique attack surface above the atmosphere. In this case, that attack surface extends hundreds of miles above the Earth. What's called the low Earth orbit, or LEO, is around 1,000 to 1,200 miles above the Earth, and that's where most of our satellites right now, as I saw, the last number I saw was around 12,000 to 13,000 satellites that are going around the Earth. And think about this: to be in low Earth orbit, these satellites and other systems that are running up there, they are going at least 17,000 miles per hour to stay in orbit. And generally, when they cross our view, at least in low Earth orbit, there are some others areas as well, but in low Earth orbit, these cross around 90 to 128 minutes at a time. So when we're looking at it, maybe we might see something going across. That's it. That's how long it takes for any particular section to see 90 minutes, 128 minutes to go around the Earth. That's incredible. Today's spacecraft, different than Sputnik at the very beginning, are complex computers with processors, sensors, communication systems, and autonomous decision-making capabilities. We'll talk a lot more about that a little bit later. So here's a diagram that helps us understand a little bit about that space systems architecture. Typically, you have several pieces here and parts. The ground segment, that's where you might think of mission control, where they are looking at sending out signals to satellites to give commands, maybe open up their antennas, or change direction. Maybe they need to face away from the sun and so on, things like that. Or maybe they need to take pictures of the Earth and then communicate those back down. The space segment, of course, that's where all the satellites and other vessels are located, all in space. And then user segment, that may be where communication is also going down to the airplane's GPS, your mobile phone, and so on, that are helping us to do a lot of the work that we're doing. Some other things that are not necessarily captured here but are represented is there's a communication segment, so that those arrows represent those links. And there's some other things like maybe encryption that's involved there, and so on, that are included. But these are the three basic and main types of segments within a space systems architecture. So what are some of the challenges? Well, physical access for updates or repairs are often limited, because think about it. I can't just simply fly up to a satellite to go and put in a new update if there's a major security issue. Not the easiest thing to do. So you have to realize that we're just not physically located near those satellites and so on. And then potential for supply chain vulnerabilities, components that are used within satellites and other devices and vessels are components that may come from multiple countries and vendors, and may have potential backdoors in hardware and software. So very much supply chain issues can be a big problem. Some specific threat vectors, signal disruptions. So for example, interference and signal jamming can disrupt radio frequencies. GPS compromise. So coordinates can be spoofed, so faked or slightly changed, leading to navigation failures, as well as GPS timing signals can affect systems like ATM networks and cellular communications. We have an interdependence on these systems as well. So attacks in space assets can immediately impact ground-based services and vice versa. The other thing that's also interesting is that there are natural events that happen, for example, space weather, storms, solar storms, things that fly out from the sun, that radiation and various gamma rays and so forth that can come back into the Earth atmosphere and of course hit satellites first and these space vessels first, and can cause all kinds of problems with communication and other issues. And at the same time, other events like security monitoring and so forth can be tampered with or mishandled, rather, in terms of not being able to get the monitoring that we need, and those could be used to cover malicious activities that may be happening to these space vessels as well. By the way, I don't mention this here, but the other thing that's also a big issue right now, as we continue to add more and more satellites, as I said, 12,000, 13,000 today, is space debris. There is so much space debris now, and I'm not just talking about the satellites themselves, but if a bolt comes loose, or and there have been times when satellites have run into other satellites, whether unintentionally or intentionally, as an attack, then you have those devices splintering all over the place, and now they become objects that are also flying in space as well. So if you can imagine a bolt that's still in orbit going a 17,000 to 20,000 miles per hour, hitting a satellite that you depend on, and you didn't realize it was there and it hit. Can you imagine what kind of damage it can do to a satellite that could be very small in many cases? And so a lot of things that could happen that are either cyber related, but also just happening are available in space that could cause problems. So in terms of analyzing some of the security issues, we talked about threat modeling that helps you identify threats and understand various scenarios. Stride is one great approach. It helps you understand spoofing and tampering, elevation of privilege related to authorization, and so on. A lot of good common threats. However, it doesn't cover everything. They don't always adequately, Stride in particular, and many other traditional frameworks for threat modeling, don't adequately cover all the unique challenges of adversarial actions against spacecraft. And so this is where we introduce an approach that has come from the Aerospace Corporation called SPARTA. SPARTA stands for Space Attack Research and Tactic Analysis. And it's a matrix that was created by Aerospace Corporation in October 2022. Essentially, it is a space-based cybersecurity framework. If you're familiar with MITRE ATT&CK, it'll look very similar, and they really based it on that format and matrix framework. The goal for SPARTA is to provide unclassified information on how spacecraft may be compromised across the entire attack lifecycle. If you're familiar with kill chains, it's like another kill chain that helps you analyze specific attacks against spacecraft and the various tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, that are used by adversaries against those space systems. So that Sparta matrix that has been put together by the Aerospace Corporation is available. Anybody can take a look at it. Continues to be updated. In fact, in early of this year, April 2025, there was a version 3.0 that came out that included a space system cybersecurity questionnaire. And even since my blog post came out early this month, there's a version 3.1 that was released, and that includes new mappings for MITRE Embed, which I think is a fantastic addition, which is MITRE Embed itself is a threat model for embedded systems. It includes recommended practices for integrating TTP frameworks and several other things as well. But another aspect that it includes is visualization, which helps space professionals understand existing threats, how they interconnect, and how they evolve throughout an attack campaign. Let me just check a quick question. Do you do threat modeling for direct attacks? Yes, absolutely. In fact, a threat model can be very helpful if you're running a pen test. Can be very helpful for pen testers or red teams to understand attack surfaces and to be able to identify, uh, what are the most likely kinds of attacks or threats that might be present in a system and to test for those. Great questions. So I'm going to jump into taking a look at Sparta. So I have that queued up here. Let me just grab a page here. So as I mentioned, this is very similar to MITRE ATT&CK. Maybe you're familiar with that, which represents a kill chain, a kind of kill chain that helps you understand the various techniques as well as tactics. And so here, for example, reconnaissance, resource development, initial access, and execution, persistence, defense, evasion, lateral movement, exfiltration, and impact. Yeah, great question about kill chain. What is a kill chain? Well, the idea behind a kill chain is that there are steps that an attacker may take to be able to go from not having access at all to finally having full access and being able to execute a particular attack. And so the kill chain is just simply representing the steps that an attacker may take in order to go from nothing, no access at all, to finally complete access and then absolutely carrying out that attack. And then, of course, the aftermath of that and everything as well. And so generally, kill chains demonstrate those steps that an attacker may take. And that's what we see here as well with Sparta is, again, the reconnaissance, initial access, execution, and so on. And then you have various techniques that are listed under each of these that a particular attacker may take. For example, let's see, I'm going to look at credential traversal. So if I dive into this one, threat actors may leverage valid credentials to traverse across spacecraft subsystems, communication buses, or even to access other spacecraft within a constellation. A constellation, spacecraft constellation, or satellite constellation, as sometimes we call them, is a number of satellites that are correlated together that create what's called a constellation. And so there are a number of communication companies that Starlink, for example, that use large constellations. I believe Starlink, last I remember, is around 4,000 satellites right now that they're using for their communication. And so they're interconnected. They have their own network. They are aware of each other, where they are, and it allows them to be available as you go around, as they go around the Earth. So to access other spacecraft within a constellation, all while avoiding detection. And then you can go through and see some of these particular countermeasures, so you can understand the particular threat. You can take a look at some of the countermeasures of how to deal with these particular threats. And they also have related to some relations to NIST, Defend, which is also from MITRE. And so you can click into these, and that'll take you into other areas. For example, network vulnerability assessment may be something to consider, and so on. One thing I'll mention about Sparta is that a lot of these threats are from real unclassified data available, real attacks from unclassified data that's been made available. So they're not just simply, oh, this is what we think might happen. The great thing about this, especially helping inform threat models, is that it helps you understand some actual threats to then build out your threat model for your particular system that you're building, whether it's a satellite that you're going to deploy or thinking about the software that you're writing, which again, that's why I'm really happy to see that they're mapping out to MITRE Embed, which is for embedded systems and threats related to that, because that's essentially what a lot of satellites are using. They're using embedded software on their devices. Some other things I will mention about that you can take a look at. There's a Sparta user guide, so you can go through this and take a look at how to use Sparta. There's so much here to take a look at. There's a new resource that's been made available, recommended practices for integrating TTP frameworks such as Sparta to secure and defend space systems. And they have a white paper that's associated with it. And you can take a look at this. This came out a year ago. If I zip down, there was one thing I wanted to show you on this one. Let's see if I can find it again. Um, Here we go. Operationalizing secure by design with TTP frameworks. And it talks about engineers should adopt a secure by design approach that incorporates threat-informed insights from the earliest stages of system development rather than relying on reactive controls applied late in the life cycle. And if you notice, one of the things it also has example application of a space segment, establishing modular security, and then of course threat modeling using applicable frameworks. And so that's what we're talking about. So absolutely integrating threat modeling into the work that we're doing with space systems, helping us to think about secure design, and using a tool like Sparta to inform about actual threats as well as potential threats, good countermeasures, and ways to deal with the possibilities that could happen for these space systems, whether it be through attacks, as we noted, from the kill chain that's represented by Sparta, or other natural events, and how do you handle those that might also impact cybersecurity or communications and so on. So great tool. There's some others that are do similar things, but Sparta is certainly one that continues to be updated. I'm really pleased with the work they're doing and looking forward to more work they'll continue to do in the future. Yeah, some great questions. I'm going to get to those in a moment. I have just a couple more slides. A defense and depth strategy for space. So when we talk about, we looked at an example, Sparta. Ultimately, we want to get to a place where we're thinking about ways to build in good countermeasures, good security controls. First and foremost, we need to make sure we're thinking about a layered defense and depth model. And that applies to space, the space segment, ground, mission control, any communication segments, of course, as well. There's always going to be, unfortunately, very much a challenge of encryption key management. Space systems are out of contact for long stretches of time, which complicates the basic requirement of encryption of command and control links. In other words, how do we send commands? How do we make sure they're encrypted? But think about that. One thing we didn't really cover in detail is that a lot of these satellites and other space systems there don't have a lot of power necessarily. Maybe limited power, maybe they're using solar power and to be able to get around the Earth to keep in orbit. Once they're in orbit, they're mostly there, but there are sometimes they need to change direction and they may need to use power. If they need to send maybe a picture back to the Earth, that takes some power and so on. Plus, there's not a lot of space. There's limited space, there's limited power, and so on. And so if you think about encryption, I need a lot of power. I need a lot of resources. And so there are a lot of challenges there. Autonomy is key. Space systems must fend for themselves. And I think this may be related to a question related to AI. Absolutely, there's a need for systems to do good think ahead for themselves, and this idea of space systems needing to fend for themselves. And so AI can be helpful there, but that's also a challenge. I can't obviously run an LLM on a space system, on a satellite. So there's got to be some ways to think about how to solve those problems. And that goes into our autonomous security capabilities. They need to detect, analyze, respond to threats without continuous human oversight. And the other thing to be aware of is there needs to be good redundancy and graceful degradation. Building in features, especially in constellation architectures, we want to make sure it's harder for attackers to disable entire services, even if individual components are breached. And so a lot of things to think about in terms of countermeasures and good security controls. And again, threat models can really help you with that. Tools like Sparta that can help you with identifying those threats, but also really good security controls to consider as well. So ultimately, our challenge is we want to build a more secure space future. So as we already talked about, the protection of space assets, requiring rigorous specialized threat modeling frameworks such as Sparta, a comprehensive security posture that integrates layered defense, autonomy, and redundancy. And this quote, space systems needs to be able to defend for themselves to overcome the limitations of distance connectivity. So important. Now, what's next? Well, we want you to get involved. Just like I did a couple of years ago when I said, hey, here's an opportunity. I never really thought about how could I get involved? How can I learn about this and maybe contribute in some way? There are numerous opportunities to learn more about the intersection of space and cybersecurity, and the need for those with this expertise will be great, especially over the coming 5 to 10 years and beyond. We're seeing, as we've mentioned, so many satellites continue to go up into space. There's issues with, of course, space debris. There's issues with space cybersecurity in general, trying to think about those threats, handling those threats, building good resilience within those devices that are there. And we also still have problems where there are a number of satellites that are still there that never put in place encryption. There's a lot of communication that's completely open. There is, in terms of the satellites themselves, there wasn't a thought 20 years ago, 15 years ago, even more. There was never a thought that anybody would be able to get access to these devices through communication and then actually connect to those satellites and be able to do something with them. There was never a thought about that because they're out of reach. Nobody's able to do that, or nobody's thinking about doing that. And so there are many satellites that are still there that are completely open and wide open to security threats. And then, so those are important as well, but especially going forward, what we call new space, uh, private corporations getting involved, and many others cooperating, government and academic, trying to figure out how to solve some of these problems. Great opportunities and a need. We've seen a number of attacks, especially over the last few years that I'm aware of, the number of attacks against space systems, jamming of GPS signals, and many other kinds of attacks have increased and will continue to increase. And so now is the time to consider getting involved and learning about how to contribute to these systems that need to be secure. Now, further learning, if you're interested, and hey, I'm interested in this, but where do I get started? There are some very cool free courses available on Coursera. I remember taking this one, Rocket Science for Everyone, a great introduction to orbits and low Earth orbit and the medium and the globe, or the not global, the GEO basically, but it's essentially doesn't. That's where GPS satellites are located. If you're also interested, there's one on cybersecurity, outer space hacking for beginners. My friend Tim Fowler has got a great YouTube presentation. It was about an hour presentation. He also gives a lot of training on this as well. That's a great way to get started. In terms of books, a couple of great books I can recommend. Cybersecurity for Space, second edition, which came out last year by Dr. Jacob Ockley. Fantastic book. Very easy to read, to get familiar with the topic and understand some of the basic concerns, and covers a lot of what we talked about, but even more in more depth. Another book that's coming out next year is, especially if you're interested more in hacking satellites and spacecraft, is the Spacecraft Hacker's Handbook, a practical guide to breaking space systems. And this is, like I said, it's coming out next year, but if you go to nostarch.com, you can get a discount I think it's I've seen 25 or 30% off on the book as they continue to write it. There are a couple of chapters out there right now. You can get a hardcover when it gets published. You'll get that, or you can get the virtual one, a PDF, and then you can continue to get updates. I have a copy of that right now. It's a fantastic start to the book. But take a look at it. Another one that's going to be really good to have if you're interested in this area. Uh, Events, lots of great events that happen all during the year. I've been to a number of these myself. There's a workshop on security, space and satellite systems that happens in San Diego. That's a one-day conference. It's more of an academic, focus on academic, but there are a lot of interesting topics and talks and presentations that happen that day in San Diego. I went there a couple of years ago. They're having this again in February, coming up this February. CubeSat, if you're interested in CubeSats, and that's part of what my research is on. There's a CubeSat developers workshop that happens in April in California. Cal Poly has done a great amount of work on this area of CubeSats. In fact, they're the ones who put together the CubeSat standard. And I went to that one as well this year. That was a fun conference just to learn a lot of the projects. And if you're a student, they have competitions for high school students and college students who are putting together CubeSats. And there's some opportunities to be able to work on those and to put them in space and then talk about them. And so if you're interested in that, it's a fantastic opportunity there as well. HackSpaceCon in Florida, I went to that. I spoke at that and gave a threat modeling workshop there for a couple hours. And that was a fun conference as well. Nice thing we got to do during lunch is we got to go out and watch actual SpaceX rocket takeoff. That was fun. First time I ever got to do that. DEF CON Aerospace Village. Aerospace Village has a lot of activities all during the year at different conferences, and they have a lot of great YouTube videos if you're interested, not just from DEF CON, but other events that they've had some presentations. So great to go check out. I've not been to Security for Space Systems in the Netherlands, and there's a few others. There's one in Paris and others events that are happening in Europe as well. These are mostly US, as I'm US focused myself. Another one that's pretty good is CyberSat coming up in November. I'm looking at and trying to see if I can get to that one as well for the first time. And there's others I'm sure I'm missing, but these are some of the ones I know about and have been really interested in, and a lot of fun. And most of them are actually relatively inexpensive to attend. So if you're interested, and that's a good plus as well. You might check these out. And so just to wrap up, I want to get into some questions. I think there were a few that I missed, but just to FYI, as I mentioned, my blog was part of the Threat Modeling Insider newsletter that my company puts out each month. And you can go take a look at it. It's a free resource. In fact, I just put out a blog post that came out today. It's called Threat Modeling and Threat Intelligence, the differences and the differences and how they complement threat modeling and threat intelligence. And that's a lot about this talk was about as well, that Sparta is really giving you a lot of good threat intelligence, which can really inform and help your threat models as well. But take a look at that if you're interested. And that's it. And so if you're interested, these slides are available. I've put them out at this link. It's a bit.ly or ly link. What it will do is take you to a Google Google Drive space, so you can download the PDF, which will have all the links and everything, so you can go check those out. And welcome to check that out. And then, of course, if you have any questions or if I can help out in any way, that's my LinkedIn. If you'd like to connect or just to follow, please do. If you do, let me know. Hey, I saw this presentation. I have some questions, or hey, just want to connect. And I love to connect with some folks. But I want to say thank you to Rebecca and Black Girls Hack and the opportunity to speak here today. Really fun, really great topic that I've always enjoyed of combining these two, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And